The crowd outside the luxury hotel went silent as the security guard stepped forward. "Sir, you can't park that motorcycle here," he said firmly. Heads turned, cameras flashed, and standing beside the entrance, billionaire Edward Harrington watched with visible disgust. "Well, this is private property," Edward added coldly. "We don't allow people like him to block the front." The biker removed his helmet slowly. Rain dripped from his leather jacket. His boots were muddy. His face looked tired, but calm. "I'm just here for the charity dinner," the biker replied quietly. "I was invited," Edward scoffed, glancing at the scratched motorcycle. "Invited?" he repeated. "You must be mistaken." The humiliation stung. Guests in expensive suits whispered and stared. Some even chuckled, but the biker didn't move. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not until I speak with the host." Edward stepped closer, his voice sharp. "I am the host." For a moment, the tension hung heavy in the air. Then suddenly, a young woman's voice echoed from behind the glass doors. "Dad, stop!" Everyone turned. Running toward them was Sophie Harrington, Edward's 19-year-old daughter. Her eyes widened the second she saw the biker. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, it's you." The crowd fell silent again. Edward frowned. Sophie, do you know this man?" Tears instantly filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Tha's the reason I'm alive." Gasps rippled through the guests. Edward blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Sophie stepped forward, her voice shaking. 3 months ago, when my car skidded off the highway during the storm, when it flipped into the ditch." Her breathing grew uneven as memories rushed back. "I was trapped inside. The doors were crushed. The water was rising. I couldn't move." The guests listened, stunned. "I screamed for help," she continued. Cars kept driving past. No one stopped. She turned slowly toward the biker, except him. All eyes shifted to the quiet man standing in the rain. Sophie wiped her tears. "He pulled over in the middle of the storm. He broke the window with his bare hands. He crawled into the wreckage and dragged me out before the car flooded." The crowd murmured in shock. Edward's face lost its color. "You never told me who saved you," said Sophie. Sophie nodded. "I didn't know his name. He left before the ambulance arrived. He refused any reward." The silence grew heavier. Edward looked back at the biker, studying him carefully now. Not as a stranger, but as a hero. "Is this true?" he asked. The biker shrugged slightly. Well, anyone would have done the same, but Sophie shook her head firmly. No, they didn't," she said. Everyone else drove away. A few guests lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Edward swallowed hard. For the first time, guilt crept into his voice. "Why are you here tonight?" he asked. The biker hesitated, then answered honestly. My name is Daniel Carter," he said. "I volunteer with a rescue group that helps accident victims. We were invited because the charity funds emergency equipment." He paused. "I came to support the cause, not to be judged by my clothes." The words hit harder than any insult. Edward looked around at the crowd. Wealthy donors, business leaders, celebrities, people who had money, but maybe not courage. Rain continued to fall, soaking Daniel's jacket. And suddenly, Edward saw something he had missed before, a bandage wrapped around Daniel's hand. Fresh scars, proof of what he had done. Edward's voice softened. "You injured yourself saving her, didn't you?" Daniel glanced down at his hand. "Alaska's," he replied simply. Nothing serious." But Sophie stepped forward again. "He needed stitches," she said. "The doctors told me later." Her eyes filled with gratitude. "He stayed with me until I was safe, then disappeared before anyone could thank him." The silence turned emotional. Edward took a deep breath. For years, he had built his empire on control, power, and status. But now, standing in front of this soaked biker, he felt small, ashamed. Slowly, deliberately, Edward stepped forward. The crowd watched closely. Then, the billionaire extended his hand. "Owe you an apology," he said, his voice steady but humbled. "A big one." Gasps spread through the guests again. Edward continued. "I judged you without knowing you. I saw your motorcycle and assumed you didn't belong here." He lowered his head slightly. "But you saved the most important person in my life." The moment felt heavy with emotion. Daniel hesitated, surprised. Then he shook Edward's hand. "No apology needed," he said calmly. "I didn't save her for recognition." Edward nodded slowly. "I know," he replied. "That's what makes it even more meaningful." Sophie smiled through tears. The tension that once filled the entrance began to melt. But Edward wasn't finished. He turned to the security guard. "From now on," he announced loudly, "this man parks wherever he wants." A ripple of laughter and applause spread through the crowd. Then Edward faced Daniel again. And tonight, he added, "You're not just a guest." He paused for effect. "You're the guest of honor." The audience erupted into full applause. Some people even stood. Daniel looked uncomfortable but grateful. I didn't expect this," he admitted. Edward placed a hand on his shoulder. "Heroes rarely do." Moments later, hotel staff rushed forward with towels and umbrellas. They guided Daniel inside, treating him with the respect he had always deserved. As the doors closed behind them, Sophie walked beside him. "You changed my life," she said quietly. Daniel smiled gently. "You changed mine too," he replied. She looked confused. "Ow!" He pointed toward the ballroom filled with donors supporting rescue services. Because tonight, he said, more lives will be saved." Inside the grand hall, Edward stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. He looked out at the audience. Hundreds of wealthy guests. Then he spoke. "Tonight, I learned something important," he began. "His success isn't measured by money, or cars, or status." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It's measured by character." His eyes moved toward Daniel. The bravest man in this room arrived on a motorcycle, in the rain, without asking for anything in return. The audience listened, deeply moved. Edward continued, "So before we begin this fundraiser, I'll want to make the first donation." He turned to the organizer. $1 million, he announced. Gasps filled the room. For emergency rescue equipment. Thunderous applause followed, but Edward raised his hand again. "And this donation," he added, "is dedicated to the man who saved my daughter when no one else would." Spotlights shifted toward Daniel. The crowd stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, respect replacing judgment. Daniel felt overwhelmed, but he stayed humble, because he hadn't acted for praise. He had acted for humanity. Later that night, as the event ended, Edward walked Daniel to the parking area. The rain had stopped. Moonlight reflected off the wet pavement. Edward looked at the motorcycle again, but this time with admiration. He said with a small smile, "Well, that bike looks pretty impressive." Daniel chuckled. "She's old," he replied, "but reliable." Edward nodded thoughtfully. Then he spoke one final sentence. "The world needs more people like you, not richer people." Daniel started his engine. The motorcycle roared to life. Before riding away, he looked back once. Edward and Sophie stood together, waving with gratitude. And for the first time that night, the billionaire felt true respect. Not for wealth, not for power, but for the man who proved that heroes don't wear suits, they wear courage.